The morning sun cast long shadows across the Broken Arrow Ranch as Marcus Thornfield stepped onto his porch, coffee mug in hand. At 6 feet 8 inches tall and weighing nearly 300 pounds, Marcus was a giant of a man who had lived alone on his sprawling Montana property for the better part of 15 years. The locals in the nearby town of Cedar Falls had long since stopped trying to befriend the solitary rancher, respecting his need for isolation after the tragedy that had driven him to seek refuge in the wilderness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But on this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. Something that would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of Cedar Falls and reveal secrets that some people would kill to keep buried. Marcus had always been a creature of habit. Every morning at dawn, he would make his rounds checking on the cattle, mending fences, and ensuring the ranch operated smoothly. The Broken Arrow spanned over 2,000 acres of prime grazing land, inherited from his grandfather who had built the operation from nothing in the 1940s. Despite his imposing physical presence, Marcus ran the ranch mostly by himself, preferring the company of his livestock to that of people. 3 months earlier, however, circumstances had forced him to hire help. A severe back injury from a fall off his horse had left him unable to handle all the daily tasks, particularly the cooking and lighter maintenance work. After weeks of living on canned beans and stale bread, he had reluctantly placed an ad in the Cedar Falls Gazette for a ranch cook and general helper. Elena Rodriguez had appeared at his doorstep on a rainy Thursday afternoon, her small frame nearly swallowed by an oversized coat. At 28, she possessed a quiet dignity that immediately set Marcus at ease. Her references were impeccable, her cooking skills exceptional, and most importantly, she seemed to understand his need for minimal conversation and maximum privacy. She moved into the small guest cabin behind the main house and quickly established a routine that worked for both of them. Elena would prepare 3 meals a day, handle the laundry, and help with basic ranch maintenance. In return, Marcus provided room, board, and a generous salary that she never questioned or complained about. She was punctual, efficient, and invisible when he needed solitude. For the first time in years, Marcus found himself looking forward to mealtimes, not just for the food, but for the brief moments of human connection that occurred when Elena would ask about his day or share a quiet observation about the weather. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Monday morning in early October. Marcus had entered the kitchen earlier than usual, hoping to catch Elena before she started breakfast preparations. He wanted to discuss the upcoming cattle drive and the additional hands he would need to hire temporarily. As he pushed through the swinging door, Elena was reaching into the high cabinet for flour, her sleeve riding up to reveal a dark purple bruise that wrapped around her forearm. Like a grotesque bracelet, she noticed his stare immediately and quickly pulled her sleeve down, turning away to busy herself with breakfast preparations. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing through possible explanations. Ranch work could be dangerous, and bruises were common enough, but something about the shape and color of the mark troubled him deeply. It looked too deliberate, too uniform to be accidental. "Elena," he said softly, his deep voice barely above a whisper. "Are you all right?" She nodded without turning around, her shoulders tense. "Just clumsy, Mr. Thornfield. Nothing to worry about." But Marcus was worried. Over the following days, he found himself paying closer attention to Elena's movements and behavior. She seemed more jumpy than usual, often glancing toward the windows as if expecting someone to appear. When deliveries arrived from town, she would retreat to her cabin immediately, avoiding any contact with outsiders. The second incident occurred the following Wednesday. Marcus was returning from the north pasture when he heard raised voices coming from the direction of Elena's cabin. By the time he had dismounted and approached the building, the voices had stopped. But he could see through the window that Elena was speaking with a man Marcus didn't recognize. The stranger was lean, wiry, with slicked back dark hair and clothes that suggested he wasn't from the rural community. More concerning was Elena's body language. She stood with her arms crossed protectively across her chest, her face turned away as if trying to avoid eye contact. Marcus positioned himself behind the large oak tree near the cabin, close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. The man's voice carried an undertone of menace that made Marcus's jaw clench with anger. "You can't hide forever, Elena. I know where you are now, and running away won't solve anything." "I told you I need more time," Elena replied, her voice barely audible. "Please just give me until the end of the month. Time's up. You know what happens when people don't pay their debts." Marcus stepped forward, his massive frame emerging from behind the tree. The stranger looked up, clearly startled by the rancher's sudden appearance and imposing size. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from years of handling difficult situations and dangerous animals. The stranger recovered quickly, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No problem at all. Just catching up with an old friend. Isn't that right, Elena?" Elena nodded mutely, but Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "Well, visiting hours on my property end at sundown," Marcus said, taking another step closer. "I suggest you head back to town." The stranger's smile faltered slightly as he looked up at Marcus's towering frame. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded and walked toward a beat-up sedan parked near the main road. As the car disappeared in a cloud of dust, Marcus turned to Elena, who had already retreated inside her cabin, and closed the door. That evening, Marcus sat on his porch long after dark, replaying the encounter in his mind. Elena's behavior during dinner had been even more withdrawn than usual, and she had excused herself immediately after serving his meal. Something was seriously wrong, and every instinct told him that Elena was in danger. Over the next few days, Marcus made subtle changes to his routine that allowed him to keep a closer eye on Elena and the ranch approaches. He started his morning rounds earlier, taking routes that provided better views of the main road and Elena's cabin. He also began carrying his rifle more frequently, a precaution he hadn't felt necessary in years. The breakthrough came the following Saturday morning when Marcus was repairing a section of fence near the creek. Elena had packed him a lunch and mentioned she would be doing laundry while he worked. Around noon, he heard the sound of an approaching vehicle and looked up to see the same sedan from the previous week, bouncing down the ranch road. This time, Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle and jogged toward Elena's cabin, arriving just as the stranger was pounding on her door. Through the thin walls, Marcus could hear Elena's voice, high and frightened. "I don't have it yet, Vincent. Please, I just need a few more weeks." "Weeks?" The man's voice was harsh and angry. "You've had months, Elena. My boss is getting impatient, and you know what that means." Marcus stepped onto the cabin's small porch, the wooden boards creaking under his weight. Vincent spun around, his hand moving instinctively toward something concealed beneath his jacket. "Step away from the door," Marcus said calmly, the rifle held loosely but ready. "Now." Vincent's eyes flicked between Marcus and the weapon, calculating. Odds that clearly didn't favor him. "This is between me and the lady, big man. No need for you to get involved." "I'm already involved," Marcus replied. "This is my property, and Elena is under my protection. You need to leave." For a moment, the two men stared at each other in tense silence. Then Vincent's face twisted into a sneer. "You don't know what you're getting into, cowboy. This girl owes some very dangerous people a lot of money. More than your little ranch could ever cover." "How much?" Marcus asked, surprising both Vincent and Elena, who had opened the door and was watching the confrontation with wide, frightened eyes. Vincent laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. $50,000. Plus interest. You got that kind of cash lying around? Marcus didn't flinch at the amount, though internally he was calculating the impact such a sum would have on his carefully managed finances. What's the interest rate? 20% per month. Elena gasped, and Marcus felt his anger building. That's not interest, that's extortion. Who do you work for? Vincent's smile turned predatory. Let's just say we provide financial services to people who can't get help from traditional banks. Elena here needed money fast for her brother's medical bills, and we were happy to help. Now it's time to collect. The pieces began falling into place for Marcus. Elena's secretive behavior, the fear in her eyes, the bruises he had noticed. All symptoms of someone trapped by loan sharks who used violence to ensure payment. He had heard stories about such operations moving into rural areas, preying on desperate people with no other options. Elena, Marcus said without taking his eyes off Vincent. Go into the main house and wait for me there. She hesitated, looking between the two men. Mr. Thornfield, I don't want you to get hurt because of my problems. Go, Marcus repeated, his voice gentle but firm. We'll talk after this gentleman leaves. Elena reluctantly obeyed, walking quickly toward the main house. Vincent watched her go, then turned back to Marcus with renewed confidence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Look, rancher, I respect what you're trying to do here, but you're out of your league. Elena signed a contract, and contracts have to be honored. If she can't pay, well, there are other ways she can work off her debt. My boss runs some businesses in Vegas and Reno that are always looking for pretty girls who need to earn money fast. The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he felt something cold and dangerous stir in his chest. In his younger days, before the tragedy that had driven him to isolation, Marcus had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger. He had seen enough of human evil to recognize it when it stood in front of him, making threats against an innocent woman. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You're going to get in your car and drive away. You're not going to come back here, ever. And you're going to tell your boss that Elena Rodriguez's debt has been paid in full. Vincent laughed again. With what money? You planning to rob a bank? Marcus set the rifle against the cabin wall and reached into his back pocket, pulling out a worn leather checkbook. Vincent's laughter died as Marcus began writing, his massive hands surprisingly deft with the pen. 50,000 plus let's say 10,000 for the accumulated interest, Marcus said, tearing out the check and holding it up. This clears her debt completely. Vincent stared at the check, clearly not having expected this turn of events. You're serious, dead serious. Take the money and leave Elena alone. Vincent reached for the check, but Marcus pulled it back slightly. First, I want to make something very clear. If I see you on my property again, if Elena reports any further contact from you or your organization, if I hear even a rumor that someone matching your description has been asking about her in town, I will come looking for you. And when I find you, we'll have a very different kind of conversation. The threat was delivered in the same calm, measured tone Marcus used to discuss the weather, which somehow made it infinitely more menacing. Vincent took the check with hands that weren't quite steady. Your funeral, he muttered, but the bravado was gone from his voice. Don't say I didn't warn you about getting involved in things you don't understand. Marcus watched the sedan disappear down the ranch road, then walked slowly toward the main house. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, tears streaming down her face. Why? She whispered as he entered the room. Why would you do that for me? Marcus pulled out a chair across from her and sat down, the wooden frame creaking under his weight. For a long moment he didn't speak, gathering his thoughts and trying to find the right words. Because everybody deserves a chance to start over, he finally said. Because no one should have to live in fear, and because ... He paused, struggling with emotions he had kept buried for years. Because I know what it's like to carry a burden that feels too heavy to bear alone. Elena's tears came harder now, her composure finally breaking after months of carrying the weight of her secret alone. Marcus sat quietly, allowing her the space to process what had just happened. When she finally looked up, her eyes held a mixture of gratitude and shame that made his chest tighten. "My brother Diego," she began, her voice hoarse. "He was diagnosed with leukemia 2 years ago. The treatments weren't covered by his insurance, and the hospital bills kept growing. I had already spent my savings, sold everything I owned, and borrowed from every friend and family member who would help." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a small streak of dirt across her cheek. "Vincent found me at the hospital cafeteria one night when I was crying over the latest bill. He seemed so understanding, so sympathetic. He said his company specialized in helping people in exactly my situation. The paperwork looked legitimate, and I was so desperate." Marcus reached across the table and placed his large hand gently over her smaller ones. "You don't have to explain anything to me, Elena. You did what any loving sister would do. But I should have read the contract more carefully," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "The interest rate was buried in the fine print, and there were clauses about collateral that I didn't understand. By the time Diego finished his treatments and went into remission, what I owed had tripled. Vincent started showing up at my apartment in Phoenix, making threats. That's when I decided to leave." Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the full scope of Elena's situation. "Is Diego okay now?" A small smile crossed her face for the first time since the confrontation. "Yes, thank God. He's been in remission for 8 months. He's back at work, engaged to his girlfriend, planning a wedding. He has no idea what I went through to pay for his care, and I wanted to keep it that way. Does he know where you are?" Elena shook her head. "I told him I was taking a job out of state for a while, that I needed some time to figure out my next steps. He thinks I'm working at a dude ranch in Wyoming." The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden table. Marcus realized that in all the months Elena had worked for him, this was the longest conversation they had ever had. He had been content with their comfortable silence, but now he found himself wanting to know more about the woman who had quietly become such an important part of his daily routine. "What did you do before all this happened?" he asked. "Before Diego got sick?" Elena's expression softened. "I was a teacher. 3rd grade at Roosevelt Elementary in Phoenix. I loved those kids more than anything." She paused, looking out the window toward the mountains. "I had to take leave when Diego got sick, and then when Vincent started threatening me, I couldn't risk putting the children in danger. I resigned last month." The weight of what Elena had sacrificed hit Marcus like a physical blow. She hadn't just left a job. She had abandoned a calling, a career that clearly brought her joy and purpose, all to protect a brother who didn't even know the extent of her sacrifice. "You could go back now," Marcus said quietly. "The debt is cleared. Vincent and his people have no reason to bother you anymore." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the table's surface. "I've been thinking about that all afternoon. I could call the school district, see if there are any openings. Move back to Phoenix, pick up where I left off." Something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely enthusiastic about the prospect, and Marcus found himself hoping she would choose to stay. Over the past months, Elena had brought something to the Broken Arrow Ranch that he hadn't realized. He was missing not just her cooking and help with daily tasks, but a sense of life and warmth that had been absent since he had chosen isolation 15 years ago. "Or," Marcus said carefully, "you could stay here. Permanently, I mean. I could use the help long term, and you seem to like the work." Elena looked at him with surprise. Mr. Thornfield, I can't let you pay me for charity. What you did today, paying off my debt, was already more kind than I had any right to expect. It wouldn't be charity, Marcus replied firmly. You've earned every dollar I've paid you, and more. This ranch runs smoother with you here than it has in years. I'd be getting the better end of the deal. Before Elena could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching interrupted their conversation. Marcus looked out the window to see 3 pickup trucks turning onto the ranch road, moving fast and kicking up clouds of dust. His blood ran cold as he recognized the lead vehicle. It was Vincent's sedan, but now it was accompanied by reinforcements. Elena, go to the back bedroom and lock the door, Marcus said, standing quickly and moving toward the gun cabinet in the hallway. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. What's happening? Elena asked, fear creeping back into her voice as she saw the approaching vehicles. Vincent decided he didn't like my terms, Marcus replied, pulling his rifle from the cabinet and checking the ammunition. Or his boss sent him back with backup. Elena hesitated in the doorway. Mr. Thornfield, maybe we should call the sheriff. Marcus shook his head grimly. Cedar Falls is 40 miles away, and Sheriff Garrett is probably at home having dinner with his family. By the time he could get here, this will be over one way or another. The vehicles pulled up in front of the main house, and Marcus could see at least 6 men getting out. Vincent emerged from the lead car, now flanked by 2 large men who looked like they had experience with violence. The other vehicles disgorged additional muscle, all of them moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. Marcus positioned himself on the front porch, the rifle held ready but not aimed directly at the approaching men. He had learned in Afghanistan that sometimes the appearance of overwhelming force could resolve a situation without bloodshed. But he also knew that desperate criminals could be unpredictable. Vincent approached with renewed confidence, clearly emboldened by his backup. Afternoon, rancher. Seems we need to have another conversation. I thought our business was concluded, Marcus replied evenly. You have your money. See, that's where we have a problem, Vincent said, stopping about 20 feet from the porch. My boss wasn't too happy about the way things went down. He thinks maybe you got a little too involved in matters that don't concern you. And that check of yours? Well, let's just say it might not be worth the paper it's written on. Marcus felt his anger building but kept his voice calm. The check is good. My bank will honor it. Maybe so, but my boss thinks Elena owes us more than just money now. You embarrassed us in front of the local community, made us look weak. That kind of thing is bad for business. One of Vincent's companions, a heavy-set man with prison tattoos covering his forearms, stepped forward. Where's the girl? We just want to talk to her. She's not available, Marcus replied. And I suggest you all get back in your vehicles and leave my property before this situation gets out of hand. Vincent laughed, but the sound was harsh and ugly. Out of hand? Friend, you're outnumbered 6-1. You might be a big son of a bitch, but you're not bulletproof. As if on cue, several of Vincent's men pulled back their jackets, revealing holstered weapons. Marcus noted their positions, calculating angles and cover options with the tactical awareness that had kept him alive in combat zones. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and he knew that Elena's safety depended on his next decisions. Let me make you a counteroffer, Marcus said, his voice dropping to the same dangerous whisper he had used earlier. I'll give you 30 seconds to get off my land. After that, I start shooting, and I don't miss. You're bluffing, Vincent sneered. You kill us, and you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But you'll be dead, and Elena will be safe. Seems like a fair trade to me. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds, neither side willing to make the first move. Then Marcus heard the sound that changed everything, the distant rumble of more vehicles approaching from the main road. But these weren't more of Vincent's reinforcements. The distinctive sound of diesel engines and heavy suspension meant only one thing: ranch trucks. Within moments, 4 pickup trucks roared into the yard, disgorging nearly a dozen men. Marcus recognized them immediately: neighboring ranchers and their hired hands. Men he had barely spoken to in years, but who had apparently decided to involve themselves in his troubles. Tom Bradley, whose ranch bordered the Broken Arrow to the south, stepped forward carrying a shotgun. At 65, Tom was still lean and tough, with the weathered face of a man who had spent his entire life working outdoors. "Afternoon, Marcus," Tom said casually, as if armed confrontations were a regular occurrence. "Thought you might be having some trouble with trespassers." Behind him, Marcus could see faces he recognized from the feed store and the annual cattle auctions: Jake Morrison, Pete Valdez, the 3 Henderson brothers, and several ranch hands whose names he didn't know but whose steady presence was deeply reassuring. Vincent looked around at the new arrivals, his confidence visibly shaking as he realized the odds had shifted dramatically against him. The local men were all armed, and unlike Vincent's crew, they had the advantage of knowing the terrain and having nothing to lose by defending their community. "This is a private matter," Vincent said, trying to salvage some authority from the rapidly deteriorating situation. "We're just here to collect a debt on Marcus's land." Tom replied mildly, "Well, that makes it our business too. See, we look out for each other around here, always have." Jake Morrison, a man nearly as large as Marcus himself, stepped forward, with a lever-action rifle cradled in his arms. "Seems to me like you boys might be lost. Main road back to town is that way." He gestured with the rifle barrel toward the ranch entrance. The message was clear, and Vincent was smart enough to recognize that he was now facing a situation he couldn't win. His original plan had relied on intimidating an isolated rancher, but he now found himself confronting a united community of armed men who were clearly prepared to use force if necessary. "This isn't over," Vincent said, but the threat sounded hollow. "Elena can't hide behind you people forever." "She's not hiding," Marcus replied firmly. "She's home. This is her home now, and we protect what's ours." Vincent and his men retreated to their vehicles, but the tension didn't ease until the last of their trucks disappeared down the ranch road. Only then did Marcus allow himself to relax slightly, though his grip on the rifle remained steady. "Tom." Bradley approached the porch, his weathered face creased with concern. "You okay, Marcus? We heard there might be trouble and thought you could use some backup." Marcus looked around at the assembled men, many of whom he had barely acknowledged in years of parallel existence in the same rural community. "How did you know?" "Elena," Tom replied simply. "She called Jake's wife Maria about an hour ago, said you might be in danger. Maria called the rest of us, and here we are." The revelation that Elena had reached out to the community on his behalf, despite her own fear and desire to remain invisible, moved Marcus more than he expected. She had risked exposure and potential danger to herself to protect him. "I appreciate you all coming," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "I know we haven't exactly been neighborly over the years." Pete Valdez, a compact man with silver hair and intelligent eyes, smiled slightly. "Marcus, you've been grieving for 15 years. We all understood that. But grief doesn't last forever, and when it's time to come back to the living, your community ought to be here for you." The simple wisdom of Pete's words hit Marcus harder than Vincent's threats had. These men had respected his need for isolation, had given him the space to heal from whatever tragedy had driven him to solitude, but they had also been quietly watching over him, ready to help when he needed it. As the neighboring ranchers began to disperse, Tom lingered on the porch. "Marcus, I don't know what kind of trouble that girl brought to your door, but it's clear she's a good person. And you've been alone out here long enough. Maybe it's time to start living again instead of just surviving." After the last of the trucks had disappeared down the road, Marcus found Elena sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale but determined. She looked up as he entered, searching his expression for any signs of injury or distress. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately. "No. I'm fine. Thanks to you for calling for help." Elena looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry I went behind your back, but I was so scared. When I saw those trucks coming, I knew Vincent hadn't accepted your deal. Maria Henderson's number was on the emergency list you gave me, and I just ... I couldn't let anything happen to you because of my problems." Marcus sat down across from her, setting the rifle carefully against the wall. "Elena, what you did today took real courage. You put yourself at risk to protect me, even though staying invisible was the safest thing for you. You did the same for me," she replied quietly. "You paid my debt, faced down those men, risked your safety for someone you barely know. The least I could do was make sure you had backup." Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted between them during the day's events. They were no longer just employer and employee maintaining a comfortable distance. They had become something rarer and more valuable, true allies, people willing to stand up for each other when it mattered most. "Elena," Marcus said carefully, "I meant what I said earlier about staying permanently. Not just because I need the help, but because I think we make a good team." She smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since Vincent's initial appearance. "I think I'd like that, Mr. Thornfield. I think I'd like that very much." Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus Thornfield felt like he might be ready to stop running from his past and start building a future. And for the first time since Diego's diagnosis, Elena Rodriguez felt like she might have found a place where she could belong, where she could be safe, and where she could help someone else heal from old wounds. Neither of them realized that Vincent's retreat was only temporary, or that the real test of their newfound partnership was still to come. 3 weeks passed without any sign of Vincent or his associates, and life at the Broken Arrow Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Elena had officially accepted Marcus's offer of permanent employment, and the change in her demeanor was remarkable. The constant tension that had shadowed her movements was gradually replaced by something Marcus hadn't seen before: genuine contentment. She had started making small improvements around the ranch house, adding wildflowers to mason jars on the kitchen table and organizing Marcus's chaotic office with the efficiency that impressed him. More significantly, she had begun venturing into town with him on supply runs, no longer hiding in her cabin whenever strangers appeared. It was during one of these trips to Cedar Falls that Marcus first learned the extent of Elena's impact on the local community. They had stopped at Garrison's Feed and Supply to pick up winter grain when Agnes Carpenter, the store owner's wife, pulled Elena aside for what appeared to be an urgent conversation. Marcus was loading 50-pound feed sacks into his truck when Elena returned, her face flushed with excitement and what looked like nervous anticipation. "What was that about?" Marcus asked as they climbed into the truck. Elena bit her lower lip, a habit he had noticed when she was working through a difficult decision. "Agnes asked if I would consider substitute teaching at the elementary school. Their regular substitute moved to Billings last month, and they're desperate for someone with classroom experience." Marcus felt a strange mix of pride and apprehension. Pride because the community was recognizing Elena's value, and apprehension because he had grown accustomed to having her presence at the ranch. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd think about it," Elena replied. "I know it would mean being away from the ranch some days, and I don't want to leave you short-handed." "Elena," Marcus said firmly, pulling the truck over to the side of the road so he could look at her directly, "you're a teacher. That's who you are, not just what you used to do. If you want to get back into the classroom, we'll make it work." Her smile was radiant. "Are you sure? I know how much you value your privacy." and having me work in town means people will start associating us more closely. There might be questions, gossip. Marcus had already considered this possibility. Cedar Falls was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and his sudden acquisition of a live-in cook had probably already generated its share of speculation. But looking at Elena's face, seeing the spark of professional purpose returning to her eyes, he realized that her happiness was worth any amount of small-town curiosity. "Let them talk," he said simply. "You're going to be an excellent teacher." Elena's return to teaching proved to be a catalyst for changes neither of them had anticipated. Within a week of her first substitute assignment, she came home bubbling with stories about the students and their various challenges. Marcus found himself looking forward to these evening debriefings, enjoying Elena's animated descriptions of classroom dynamics and her creative solutions to educational problems. Importantly, Elena's presence at the school had begun to bridge the gap between Marcus and the broader community. Parents who had barely acknowledged him in years were now stopping to chat when they encountered him in town, usually to praise Elena's work with their children. The school principal, Dorothy Hensley, had even called the ranch personally to compliment Elena's innovative teaching methods. It was Principal Hensley's call that first alerted Marcus to a potential problem brewing in town. She had phoned on a Thursday evening while Elena was grading papers at the kitchen table, her tone carefully neutral but underlying with concern. "Mr. Thornfield, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I felt you should know that someone has been asking questions about Elena around town. A man claiming to be from the state education department, wanting to verify her credentials and employment history." Marcus felt his blood pressure rise. "Can you describe this man?" "Thin, dark hair, expensive suit that looked out of place here." He said his name was Williams, but something about him didn't feel right. When I offered to call the state office to confirm his identity, he said that wouldn't be necessary and left rather quickly. After hanging up, Marcus shared the conversation with Elena, watching her face go pale as the implications sank in. "It has to be someone working for Vincent's boss," she said quietly. "They're trying to find leverage against us, or maybe they're planning something and want to understand my routine." Marcus nodded grimly. "We need to assume they know about your teaching schedule, which means they know when you're most vulnerable." Driving back and forth to town, alone at the school after hours, that night, Marcus made 2 important phone calls. The first was to Tom Bradley, asking if he could spare one of his ranch hands to help with some temporary security concerns. The second was to his bank in Billings, instructing them to transfer a significant sum from his savings account to a more accessible checking account. The next morning, a young cowboy named Danny Morrison arrived at the ranch driving a dusty pickup truck and carrying a well-maintained hunting rifle. Danny was Jake Morrison's nephew, fresh out of the Army and looking for work while he decided on his next career move. More importantly, he had been a military police officer and understood the basics of personal protection. "Danny's going to be doing some part-time work around the ranch," Marcus explained to Elena over breakfast. "He'll also be available to escort you to and from school when I can't do it myself." Elena started to protest that such measures weren't necessary, but Marcus cut her off gently. "Elena, these people threaten to force you into prostitution. They're not going to give up just because we embarrass them. We're going to take reasonable precautions until we're sure the threat has passed." The wisdom of Marcus's precautions became apparent the following Monday morning. Elena was scheduled to teach a full day at the elementary school, covering for a teacher who was attending a conference in Helena. Danny had driven her to town in his pickup truck, with plans to return to collect her at the end of the school day. Around 3 o'clock, Marcus received a phone call that made his heart stop. It was Agnes Carpenter, calling from the feed store with barely controlled panic in her voice. "Marcus, you need to get to the school right now. There are strange men asking about Elena, and they don't look like the kind of people who should be around children." Marcus was out the door before Agnes finished speaking, grabbing his rifle and cell phone as he ran to his truck. As he drove toward town at dangerous speeds, he called Danny's number, getting only voicemail. A growing sense of dread settled in his stomach as he tried Elena's phone with the same result. Cedar Falls Elementary School sat on the edge of town, a single-story brick building surrounded by playground equipment and a large parking lot. As Marcus pulled in, he immediately spotted Danny's truck parked near the main entrance, but something was wrong with the picture. The driver's side door was standing open, and there was no sign of Danny himself. Marcus parked quickly and approached the building, his rifle held ready but pointed down to avoid alarming any children or teachers who might still be inside. The school appeared to be in the middle of its normal afternoon dismissal routine, with buses arriving and parents picking up their kids. He found Danny behind the building, sitting against a concrete wall with blood trickling from a cut on his forehead and his hands zip-tied behind his back. The young man was conscious but groggy, clearly having been struck by something heavy. "Danny, what happened?" Marcus asked as he cut the restraints with his pocket knife. "3 guys jumped me when I was walking Elena to the car," Danny said, accepting Marcus's help to stand. "Professional job, came out of nowhere. They grabbed Elena and threw her into a van. I tried to stop them, but one of them hit me with something." He touched his head gingerly. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I should have seen it coming." Marcus helped Danny to his truck, his mind racing through possible responses. "Did you see which direction they went?" "North, toward the interstate," Danny replied. "Black van, no plates that I could see. There were at least 4 of them total." Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed 911, knowing even as he did so that the local sheriff's department was ill-equipped to handle a professional kidnapping. Cedar Falls had 2 deputies and a sheriff who dealt mainly with drunk drivers and domestic disputes. By the time they organized any kind of response, Elena could be hundreds of miles away. After giving the emergency dispatcher the basic information, Marcus called Tom Bradley and quickly explained the situation. Tom's response was immediate and decisive. "I'm calling everyone," Tom said. "Jake, Pete, the Henderson boys, and anyone else who can ride. We'll set up roadblocks on every route out of the county. If they're still in the area, we'll find them." While waiting for help to arrive, Marcus questioned Danny more thoroughly about the kidnapping, trying to extract every detail that might be useful. The precision of the operation confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't Vincent acting impulsively, but a carefully planned operation directed by someone with significant resources and experience. The leader was older, maybe 55, with silver hair and expensive clothes, Danny reported. He didn't say much, but when he did talk, he had some kind of accent. Maybe East Coast or possibly foreign. The other guys looked like professional. Muscle, not local talent. Within 30 minutes, the elementary school parking lot had become an impromptu command center. Sheriff Garrett had arrived with his 2 deputies, looking overwhelmed but determined. Tom Bradley and his neighbors had set up a communication network using CB radios, coordinating search efforts across the county. Most importantly, Jake Morrison had brought something Marcus hadn't expected: technological assistance. Jake's oldest son, Michael, worked for a tech company in Seattle and was home visiting for a few weeks. Michael had brought his laptop and was already accessing traffic cameras and cell phone tower data, trying to track the kidnapper's route. "I can't access the federal databases without a warrant," Michael explained, "but I can monitor social media posts and local traffic reports. If anyone spotted an unusual van or suspicious activity, it might show up online." The break came from an unexpected source. Maria Valdez, Pete's wife, called Tom's cell phone with information from her sister, who lived 30 miles north of Cedar Falls along the interstate corridor. "Rosa saw a black van pulled over at the old Sinclair station," Maria reported. "She said there were several men standing around it, and it looked like they were having some kind of argument. One of them kept looking at his phone like he was waiting for a call. Marcus knew the abandoned gas station Maria was referring to. It had been closed for over a decade, sitting at a remote junction where a county road intersected with the interstate. It would be an ideal location for criminals to regroup and decide on their next move. That's 15 minutes from here if we push it, Sheriff Garrett said, studying a map spread across the hood of his patrol car. But if they're professionals, they might have lookouts or escape routes planned. Marcus was already walking toward his truck. Sheriff, I respect your position, but Elena doesn't have time for a careful law enforcement approach. These people are going to move her somewhere we'll never find her, and they're going to do it soon. Marcus, I can't let civilians. You can't stop me either, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying a finality that silenced further argument. Elena risked her life to save mine. I'm going to return the favor. Tom Bradley stepped forward, his weathered face set with determination. Marcus doesn't go alone. This community takes care of its own. Within minutes, a convoy of pickup trucks was racing north through the Montana countryside, carrying armed ranchers who were prepared to take on professional criminals to save one of their own. Sheriff Garrett followed behind in his patrol car, radioing for backup from the state police while privately hoping they would arrive in time to prevent a bloodbath. As they approached the abandoned gas station, Marcus could see the black van parked behind the main building, partially hidden from the road. 3 men stood near the vehicle, their body language suggesting tension and disagreement. More importantly, Marcus could see movement inside the van. Someone was definitely being held inside. There, Tom Bradley said quietly, pointing toward the van. And there's at least 2 more men positioned as lookouts near the road. Marcus studied the tactical situation with the analytical mindset that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. The kidnappers had chosen their position well, with good sight lines in all directions and multiple escape routes. But they had also made a crucial mistake. They were arguing instead of moving, which suggested internal disagreement about their next steps. They're waiting for orders from their boss, Marcus realized. Which means we have a narrow window before they relocate Elena somewhere we'll never reach her. The ranchers spread out in a loose perimeter around the gas station, using their knowledge of the terrain to approach from multiple angles. Marcus positioned himself with a clear view of the van, his rifle trained on the nearest kidnapper. He could see Elena through the van's rear window, her hands tied, but her posture suggesting she was uninjured. The confrontation that followed would become legend in Cedar Falls, talked about for years as the day the community came together to protect one of their own. But for Marcus, focused intently on Elena's safety, it was simply a matter of doing whatever was necessary to bring her home safely. The first shot came from Jake Morrison, aimed at the front tire of the van to prevent escape. The sound shattered the afternoon quiet and sent the kidnappers scrambling for cover. But Marcus was already moving, covering the distance to the van with surprising speed for such a large man. What happened next would change everything. Not just for Marcus and Elena, but for the entire community of Cedar Falls. The gunshot echoed across the empty Montana landscape like thunder, and Marcus used the confusion it created to close the distance to the van in seconds. The kidnappers had expected law enforcement protocols, careful negotiations, and measured responses. They hadn't prepared for an enraged giant charging across open ground with the tactical precision of a military veteran. Marcus reached the van just as one of the kidnappers was fumbling for his weapon. Without hesitation, Marcus struck him with the butt of his rifle, dropping the man instantly. Through the van's rear window, he could see Elena's eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "Elena, get down!" Marcus shouted as bullets began flying from multiple directions. The other ranchers had opened fire from their concealed positions, creating a crossfire that pinned down the remaining kidnappers behind the gas station's concrete barriers. The van's back door was locked, but Marcus's adrenaline-fueled strength made short work of the handle, wrenching it completely off its hinges. Elena was inside, her hands bound with zip ties and a piece of duct tape across her mouth, but she appeared unharmed. Marcus cut her restraints with his knife while bullets whined overhead. "Can you run?" he asked urgently. Elena nodded, pulling the tape from her mouth. "There's someone else," she gasped. "They have another prisoner in the front of the van." Marcus peered through the partition, separating the van's cargo area from the driver's compartment. Slumped in the passenger seat was a young man Marcus didn't recognize, unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. The kidnapper who had been guarding Elena was nowhere to be seen, having apparently fled when the shooting started. "Who is he?" Marcus asked as he worked to free the second prisoner. "I don't know his name," Elena replied, helping to support the injured man. "But I heard them talking. He owes money to the same people I did, and they were going to use him to send a message to other debtors." The unconscious man was roughly Elena's age, with calloused hands that suggested manual labor and clothes that marked him as working class. A wallet in his back pocket identified him as Timothy Walsh from Great Falls, about 200 miles east of Cedar Falls. Marcus quickly assessed the tactical situation outside the van. The gunfire had died down, which could mean either that the ranchers had gained control or that the kidnappers were planning something. He needed to get Elena and Timothy to safety before the situation deteriorated further. "Elena, I need you to stay low and move toward that drainage ditch about 50 yards behind us," Marcus instructed, pointing to a depression that would provide cover from gunfire. "I'll carry Timothy and follow you. What about you?" Elena asked, her voice tight with concern. "I'll be right behind you. Go." Elena sprinted toward the ditch while Marcus lifted Timothy's unconscious form over his shoulder. The young man was heavier than he looked, but Marcus's years of ranch work had given him the strength to manage the burden even while carrying his rifle. They had almost reached the safety of the drainage ditch when Marcus heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the distinctive whine of a high-powered motorcycle approaching at speed. He looked back to see Vincent racing toward them on a dirt bike, a pistol in his free hand and murder in his eyes. Marcus pushed Elena down into the ditch and rolled Timothy's body after her, then turned to face Vincent's approach. There was no time to aim carefully. Marcus fired from the hip, the rifle bullet taking a chunk out of the motorcycle's front wheel. Vincent went down hard, the bike cartwheeling through the air before crashing into the side of the abandoned gas station. But Vincent wasn't finished. Despite the crash, he had managed to hold onto his weapon and was already struggling to his feet, blood streaming from multiple cuts, but his gun hand steady. The distance between them was less than 30 yards, close enough that even an injured man could hardly miss. "You should have minded your own business, cowboy," Vincent snarled, raising his pistol. "Now the girl gets to watch you die before we take her somewhere special." Marcus knew he couldn't work the rifle's bolt action fast enough to get off another shot before Vincent fired. Time seemed to slow as he watched Vincent's finger tighten on the trigger, his mind automatically calculating the angle and distance of the shot that would end his life. The gunshot, when it came, was deafeningly loud, but somehow wrong. Instead of the sharp crack of Vincent's pistol, it was the deeper boom of a hunting rifle fired from a distance. Vincent spun around like a marionette with cut strings, his weapon flying from suddenly nerveless fingers as a bullet from Tom Bradley's rifle took him in the shoulder. "You talk too much," Tom called out from his position behind a concrete barrier, already working the bolt of his rifle for a follow-up shot if necessary. Vincent collapsed to his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder and staring up at Marcus with a mixture of pain and disbelief. Around the gas station, the other kidnappers were surrendering to the ranchers, their professional confidence shattered by the fierce resistance they had encountered. Sheriff Garrett arrived at that moment, his patrol car sliding to a stop in a cloud of dust. Behind him came two state police cruisers, their occupants emerging with weapons drawn, and the systematic movements of trained law enforcement officers. "Sheriff's Department. Everyone drop your weapons," Garrett shouted, though the command seemed somewhat anticlimactic given that the situation was clearly under control. Marcus helped Elena and Timothy out of the drainage ditch, noting with relief that both appeared to be uninjured despite their ordeal. Timothy was beginning to regain consciousness, blinking in confusion at the chaos surrounding him. "What happened?" Timothy mumbled, accepting Marcus's help to stand. "Last thing I remember was leaving work in Great Falls." Elena quickly explained the situation while Marcus gave his statement to the state police investigators. It emerged that Timothy worked at a meat packing plant and had borrowed money from the same criminal organization to cover his mother's medical expenses. When he couldn't make his payments, the loan sharks had decided to use him as an example to other debtors. "They grabbed me outside my apartment complex," Timothy explained to the police. "Said they were going to make a video of what happens to people who don't pay their debts, then post it online as a warning to others." The scope of the criminal enterprise was becoming clear as the state police questioned the captured kidnappers. Vincent's organization was part of a larger network that operated across several states, targeting desperate people with predatory loans and using violence to enforce collection. Elena and Timothy were just two of dozens of victims who had been terrorized, kidnapped, or worse. Vincent himself proved to be more talkative than anyone expected once he was handcuffed and receiving medical attention for his gunshot wound. Whether from shock, pain medication, or simple vindictiveness, he began providing detailed information about his organization's operations. "You think this is over?" Vincent laughed bitterly as paramedics loaded him into an ambulance. "You people have no idea who you're dealing with. My boss has connections you can't imagine, resources that make your little cowboy rescue look like a joke." Detective Sarah Chun from the state police leaned closer to Vincent's stretcher. "Why don't you tell us about these connections? Maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement." Vincent's expression turned cunning despite his obvious pain. "Antonio Breslin runs operations from Vegas to Denver. Politicians, judges, cops. He owns people in every state between here and the East Coast. You arrest me, and I'll be out on bail before you finish the paperwork." Marcus felt a chill at Vincent's words. He had assumed that paying Elena's debt and defeating the immediate threat would end their troubles. But if Vincent was telling the truth, they had only antagonized a much larger and more dangerous organization. Detective Chun seemed to read his thoughts. "Mr. Thornfield, I need you to understand that what happened here today, while justified, may have larger consequences. If this Breslin character is as connected as Vincent claims, you and Elena could still be in danger. What are you suggesting?" Marcus asked. "Federal witness protection might be an option, depending on what information Elena and Timothy can provide about the organization's operations. The FBI has been trying to build a case against these predatory lending networks for years." Elena, who had been listening quietly to the conversation, stepped forward with determination in her voice. "Detective Chun, I'll tell you everything I know about how they operate, but I'm not running anymore. This is my home now, these are my people, and I'm not going to let criminals drive me away from the life I've built here." Timothy nodded his agreement. "Count me in too. They threatened my mother, kidnapped me, and planned to torture me for an internet video. I want to see them all in prison." The state police spent the rest of the afternoon collecting evidence and taking statements from everyone involved. The abandoned gas station was cordoned off as a crime scene, and the kidnapper's van was loaded onto a flatbed truck for forensic examination. As the sun began to set, Marcus finally had a moment alone with Elena. They sat on the tailgate of his pickup truck, watching the last of the police vehicles disappear down the highway toward town. "Are you really okay?" Marcus asked, studying Elena's face for signs of trauma or shock. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice carried a tremor that suggested otherwise. "Scared, angry, but fine. What about you? You could have been killed." Today, Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing the day's events and their implications. Elena, Vincent wasn't bluffing about his boss having resources and connections. Even with him in custody, there could be others coming. Maybe Detective Chun is right about witness protection. Elena turned to face him directly, her dark eyes reflecting the determination that had carried her through months of threats and fear. "Marcus, 3 months ago I was hiding in Phoenix, jumping at every shadow and living in constant terror. Today, when those men grabbed me, I wasn't thinking about running or hiding. I was thinking about getting back home to the ranch, to you, to the life we've been building together. But if staying here puts you in danger, everything worthwhile involves some risk," Elena interrupted. "Besides, look what happened today. This community came together to rescue me. People who barely knew my name 3 months ago were willing to risk their lives to bring me home safely. I can't walk away from that kind of loyalty and support." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding Elena's feelings because he shared them. The events of the day had shown him something he had forgotten during his 15 years of isolation: the power of belonging to a community that cared enough to fight for its members. "There's something else," Elena continued, her voice growing softer. "When I was tied up in that van, listening to those men plan what they were going to do to both of us, I realized something important. I'm not just grateful to you for paying my debt or giving me a job. I'm grateful for the chance to be part of your life, to help you heal from whatever drove you to live alone for so many years." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a wall that had protected him from emotional connection beginning to crumble. "Elena, there are things about my past, reasons why I chose isolation, that you don't know about." "Then tell me," she said simply. "We've got time, and after today, I think we've proven we can handle whatever comes next." As they drove back toward the Broken Arrow Ranch, Marcus began to tell Elena the story he had never shared with anyone in Cedar Falls. It was a story of loss and guilt, of choices made in combat that had saved lives but cost him his peace of mind. It was the story of why a decorated Army Ranger had chosen to hide from the world rather than risk making decisions that might hurt the people he cared about. But it was also, Marcus realized as Elena listened without judgment or pity, a story that was finally ready to have a different ending. One that included trust, community, and the possibility that even the most damaged people could find there. Way back to life and love, the lights of the ranch house appeared ahead of them as Marcus finished his story. And for the first time in 15 years, he felt like he was truly coming home. 2 months after the kidnapping incident, the Broken Arrow Ranch had transformed into something Marcus barely recognized. What had once been a fortress of solitude now bustled with activity as federal agents, prosecutors, and investigators used it as a secure base for building their case against Antonio Breslin's criminal network. Elena had proven to be an invaluable witness, her sharp memory and attention to detail helping the FBI piece together the scope of Breslin's operations. Timothy Walsh had relocated to Cedar Falls temporarily, staying in town while providing his own testimony and recovering from the psychological trauma of his ordeal. The three of them had become an unlikely team, united by their shared experience and determination to see justice done. But the investigation had also brought unexpected complications. FBI agent Jennifer Rawlings, a 30-something specialist in organized crime, had taken up residence in the ranch's guest cabin, turning it into a makeshift command center filled with computers, communication equipment, and files documenting years of criminal activity. "We've identified at least 47 victims across 6 states, Agent Rawlings explained during one of their regular briefings. Elena and Timothy's testimonies have been crucial in establishing patterns of operation and identifying other members of the organization. Marcus listened from his position by the kitchen window, watching for any signs of surveillance or unwanted visitors. Despite Vincent's arrest and the ongoing federal investigation, the threat level remained high. Breslin's organization had deep pockets and long reach, and there had already been attempts to intimidate witnesses in other jurisdictions. What's the timeline for actually arresting Breslin? Elena asked, her voice carrying the strain of 2 months spent looking over her shoulder. Soon, Agent Rawlings replied, though Marcus noticed she didn't provide specifics. We're coordinating with multiple agencies to hit all of his operations simultaneously. When we move, it needs to be comprehensive enough that he can't just relocate and start over somewhere else. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching the ranch. Marcus tensed automatically, his hand moving toward the rifle that now lived within easy reach of every room in the house. But the approaching vehicles were marked federal cars, and Marcus recognized the driver of the lead vehicle as Agent Rawlings' supervisor from the Billings field office. Special Agent in charge Patricia Morrison was a woman who commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation. She had visited the ranch several times during the investigation, and Marcus had come to appreciate her straightforward approach and genuine concern for witness safety. "We have a problem," Agent Morrison announced without preamble as she entered. "The kitchen." Breslin's lawyers have filed a motion, claiming that his arrest warrant is based on testimony obtained through vigilante violence. They're arguing that the entire case should be dismissed because the initial evidence was gathered outside proper legal channels. Elena's face went pale. "You mean because the ranchers rescued us instead of waiting for law enforcement?" "Exactly. Breslin's legal team is very good, and they're claiming that the confrontation at the gas station violated his organization's constitutional rights. It's a long shot, but if a sympathetic judge agrees, months of investigation could be thrown out." Marcus felt a familiar surge of the anger that had driven him to charge across open ground to rescue Elena. "So because we didn't let them kidnap and torture innocent people, the criminals get to walk free?" "It's more complicated than that," Agent Morrison replied. "But yes, there's a possibility that Breslin could escape prosecution on a technicality, which is why we need to accelerate our timeline." Agent Rawlings looked up from her laptop with concern. "How accelerated are we talking?" 48 hours. "We're moving on all of Breslin's operations this weekend, before his lawyers can get any court orders that might interfere with the arrests." The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. A rushed operation meant higher risks, less preparation time, and greater chances that something could go wrong. It also meant that Elena and Timothy would need to be in federal custody for their own protection during the most dangerous phase of the investigation. "Where will you take them?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "There's a secure facility in Denver where they'll be safe until after the arrests," Agent Morrison explained. "It's temporary, just until we're certain that Breslin and his top lieutenants are in custody." Elena stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "No, I'm not leaving the ranch, and I'm not going into hiding again." "Elena, this isn't a request," Agent Morrison said gently but firmly. "Intelligence suggests that Breslin is planning something desperate. Vincent's been talking to his cellmate, and our sources indicate that Breslin has sent a team of specialists to Colorado and Montana. Professional killers, not the local muscle we've dealt with so far." "Then let them come," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the same dangerous undertone that had intimidated Vincent months earlier. "This ranch has been attacked before, and we know how to defend it." Agent Morrison studied Marcus carefully. "Mr. Thornfield, I understand your desire to protect Elena, but you're talking about facing professional assassins, not desperate loan sharks. These people have military training and serious firepower." "So do I," Marcus replied simply. Over the next 2 hours, a heated debate raged in the ranch kitchen. The FBI agents argued for the safety of federal protection, while Marcus, Elena, And even Timothy advocated for making a stand at the ranch. The argument was interrupted by a phone call that changed everything. Agent Rawlings answered her secure satellite phone, her expression growing increasingly grim as she listened to the caller. When she hung up, her face was pale. "That was the Denver field office," she announced. Breslin escaped federal custody. He was being transported from his holding facility to court for a bail hearing when his convoy was attacked. 3 agents are dead, and Breslin is in the wind. The kitchen erupted in urgent conversation as the agents began coordinating response measures. Marcus grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her aside, his mind already shifting into the tactical mindset that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. "Elena, everything just changed. Breslin is desperate now, and desperate people do desperate things. You need to get somewhere safe while I prepare the ranch for what's coming." Elena's jaw set with familiar determination. "Marcus, I told you months ago that I'm not running anymore. If Breslin wants a fight, he'll get one, but I'm not abandoning you to face it alone." "This isn't about courage or loyalty," Marcus argued. "This is about tactics and survival. If you're here, I'll be focused on protecting you instead of fighting effectively. And if I'm somewhere else, you'll be worried about whether I'm actually safe and fighting distracted," Elena countered. "Marcus, we're stronger together. We've proven that." Their argument was interrupted by Timothy, who had been quietly listening from the doorway. "If I may," he said hesitantly, "I think there's a third option we haven't considered." Both Marcus and Elena turned to look at the young man, who had grown more confident during his weeks in Cedar Falls but still spoke with careful deference. "What if we don't wait for Breslin to come to us?" Timothy continued. "What if we take the fight to him instead?" Agent Morrison overheard Timothy's suggestion and shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. We're not turning this into some kind of vigilante operation." "With respect, Agent Morrison," Marcus said, "your official operation just got 3 federal agents killed and lost the primary target. Maybe it's time to consider unofficial alternatives." Agent Rawlings looked up from her laptop with a thoughtful expression. "Actually, there might be a way to make Timothy's idea work within legal boundaries. If we use Elena and Timothy as bait to draw Breslin out, but do it as a controlled operation with federal oversight, ... You want to use Elena as bait?" Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than shouting. "Hear me out," Agent Rawlings continued quickly. "Breslin's escaped, but he's not going to run. His entire organization is being dismantled. His assets are frozen, and he's facing life in prison if he's captured. His only chance is to eliminate the witnesses who can testify against him." Agent Morrison was already shaking her head. "Jennifer, using civilians as bait is against every protocol we have." "But it could work," Elena said quietly, her voice cutting through the argument. "Breslin needs me dead to have any chance of beating the charges. If I'm here, in the open, he'll come. And when he does, you'll be ready for him." The plan that emerged over the next several hours was both audacious and dangerous. Elena would remain at the ranch, maintaining her normal routine of teaching and community involvement, but under heavy but invisible federal surveillance. The hope was that Breslin would attempt to eliminate her at a time and place where the FBI could respond to overwhelming force. Marcus insisted on 2 non-negotiable conditions. First, he would be Elena's primary protection, not the federal agents. Second, if the operation went wrong, the FBI would evacuate Elena immediately and without argument. As night fell, the ranch took on the appearance of a fortress. Federal agents positioned themselves throughout the property, their sophisticated surveillance equipment turning the Broken Arrow into an electronic net designed to detect any approaching threat. Marcus checked and rechecked his weapons, his movements carrying the precise efficiency of a soldier preparing for battle. Elena found him on the front porch just after midnight, sitting in the darkness and watching the approaches to the ranch house. She settled beside him without speaking, her presence both comforting and terrifying given what the next few days might bring. "Are you scared?" she asked quietly. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Not of dying, if that's what you mean. I made peace with that possibility a long time ago. But I'm terrified of failing to protect you." "Marcus, what happened to you in Afghanistan?" Elena asked. "You've mentioned it several times, but you've never told me the whole story." Marcus was quiet for so long that Elena began to think he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he began to speak. "My unit was assigned to protect a village that was being terrorized by insurgents. The locals had started cooperating with coalition forces, providing intelligence about militant activities. In retaliation, the insurgents were targeting civilian families." He paused, his hands clenching and unclenching as he relived memories that had haunted him for 15 years. There was a family, a schoolteacher, his wife, and their 2 daughters. They had been helping us identify insurgent safe houses. One night, we got intelligence that the insurgents were planning to execute the entire family as an example to the other villagers. Elena waited patiently, sensing that Marcus needed to tell this story at his own pace. "I made a decision to move the family to a secure location before the insurgents could reach them. But the intelligence was wrong, or maybe it was a trap. When we arrived at their house, it was already rigged with explosives. The blast killed the teacher's wife and youngest daughter. The man I was trying to protect lost his family because I chose to act instead of waiting for orders." Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. "That's why you isolated yourself. You blamed yourself for their deaths." Marcus nodded miserably. "I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. Every decision I made seemed to put innocent people in danger. So I stopped making decisions that could affect other people's lives." Elena took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Marcus, you saved that man and his older daughter. Without your intervention, the entire family would have died. But they died because of my intervention. They died because evil people planted bombs to kill innocents," Elena corrected firmly. "You can't take responsibility for every act of violence in the world. Sometimes good people make the best decisions they can with the information they have, and bad things still happen." For the first time in 15 years, Marcus felt the crushing weight of guilt begin to lift slightly from his shoulders. Elena's words didn't erase his regrets, but they offered a different perspective on events that had shaped his entire adult life. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion, "if something happens to you because of my decisions, then I'll know that you did everything possible to protect me." Elena interrupted. "Just like you did for that family in Afghanistan. Just like you've done every day since Vincent first showed up at this ranch." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the night sounds of the Montana wilderness. In the distance, Marcus could see the faint heat signatures of federal agents maintaining their surveillance perimeter. "There's something else I need to tell you," Elena said suddenly. "Something I realized during all those hours tied up in that van." Marcus turned to look at her, noting the change in her voice. "I'm in love with you," she said simply. "I know the timing is terrible, and I know we might not survive the next few days, but I needed you to know." Marcus felt his heart stop for a moment, then begin beating with an intensity that made him dizzy. In all his planning for the coming confrontation, he had never allowed himself to consider the possibility that Elena might share the feelings that had been growing in his own heart. "Elena," he began, but she placed a finger gently against his lips. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "I just wanted you to know that whatever happens, these past few months have been the happiest of my life. You gave me back my sense of purpose, helped me find a community where I belong, and showed me what it means to have someone willing to fight for you." Marcus removed her hand from his lips and held it gently in both of his. "Elena Rodriguez, I love you too. More than I thought it was possible to love another person. And when this is over, When Breslin is in prison and the threats are gone, I want to build a real life with you. Marriage, children, growing old together on this ranch. Elena's smile was radiant even in the darkness. I'd like that very much. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft buzz of Marcus's radio. Agent Rawlings' voice crackled through the speaker with urgent tension. Marcus, Elena, we have movement on the north perimeter. Multiple vehicles approaching without lights. This is it. Marcus stood quickly, helping Elena to her feet. Elena, remember what we agreed. At the first sign that things are going wrong, you go with the agents to the safe room in the basement. And you remember what I told you, Elena replied, checking the small pistol Agent Morrison had given her for emergency protection. We're stronger together. As they prepared to face Antonio Breslin's final desperate assault on the Broken Arrow Ranch, Marcus realized that Elena was right about more than just tactical considerations. He was stronger with her in his life, more focused and determined than he had been in 15 years of isolation. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, and Marcus could see muzzle flashes beginning to light up the darkness as Breslin's hired killers opened fire on the federal agents' positions. The final battle for Elena's freedom and their future together was about to begin. But for the first time since that tragic night in Afghanistan, Marcus Thornfield felt confident in his ability to protect the people he loved. He was no longer the isolated, guilt-ridden veteran who had fled to Montana seeking escape from the world. He was a man with something worth fighting for, surrounded by a community willing to stand with him, and guided by a love that had given him back his sense of purpose. As the first bullets shattered the windows of the ranch house, Marcus smiled grimly and prepared to show Antonio Breslin exactly what happened when someone threatened his family. The battle for the Broken Arrow Ranch began at 2:47 a.m. with the systematic precision of a military assault. Breslin's hired killers had studied the property layout and federal agent positions, using night vision equipment and suppressed weapons to create maximum chaos in the opening moments of their attack. Marcus hit the floor as bullets shattered the living room windows, pulling Elena down beside him while glass rained over their heads. The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions, indicating that Breslin had brought a substantial force to overwhelm the federal protection detail. Basement now, Marcus shouted over the gunfire, but Elena was already moving toward the reinforced door that led to the ranch house's foundation level. Agent Morrison had spent considerable time preparing the basement as a secure fallback position, complete with communication equipment and enough supplies to withstand a prolonged siege. But as they reached the basement door, Marcus realized that something was wrong with the federal response. The return fire from the agents' positions was sporadic and uncoordinated, suggesting that Breslin's team had achieved tactical surprise despite the extensive surveillance network. Agent Rawlings' voice crackled through Marcus's radio, strain and urgency evident in her transmission. Marcus, we've got problems. They're jamming our communications and using some kind of thermal imaging countermeasures. We can't coordinate our response effectively. Marcus understood the implications immediately. Breslin hadn't just hired common criminals for this assault. He had recruited military professionals with access to sophisticated equipment. The federal agents, despite their training and preparation, were facing an enemy that outclassed them in both technology and tactical experience. How many agents are still operational? Marcus asked into his radio while helping Elena descend the basement stairs. Unknown. I've lost contact with the perimeter teams, and Agent Morrison's position has gone silent. We might be the only federal personnel still in the fight. Elena reached the bottom of the stairs and immediately began activating the basement security systems, reinforced steel shutters that would seal the windows, and a blast door that could secure the stairway access. But Marcus hesitated at the top of the stairs, his military instincts warring with his desire to keep Elena safe. Marcus, what are you doing? Elena called up to him. Get down here. Elena, if the federal agents are compromised, you're only safe if someone stops Breslin's team before they reach this basement. Those blast doors will hold for a while, but not indefinitely against military-grade explosives. Elena's face went pale as she understood what Marcus was suggesting. You're not going back out there alone. That's suicide. Not alone, Marcus replied, checking his rifle and the tactical vest Agent Morrison had provided. Timothy's still in the guest cabin with Agent Rawlings. Tom Bradley and the other ranchers are probably already responding to the gunfire. This is my home, Elena. I'm not going to hide in the basement while other people fight to defend it. Before Elena could argue further, Marcus sealed the blast door and activated the basement's independent communication system. Elena would be able to monitor the situation and call for additional federal backup, but she would be secure from direct attack. Marcus emerged from the ranch house into a scene that resembled a war zone. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as automatic weapons fired from concealed positions around the property. The guest cabin where Agent Rawlings and Timothy had been positioned was burning, though Marcus could see movement near the structure that suggested at least some of the occupants had escaped, moving with the tactical precision that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Marcus used the ranch's outbuildings for cover as he worked his way toward the sound of heaviest fighting. His knowledge of the terrain gave him a significant advantage over Breslin's team, allowing him to approach their positions from unexpected angles. The first target was a sniper positioned in the barn's hayloft, using a high-powered rifle to pin down the federal agents near the main road. Marcus approached the barn from the blind side, using a maintenance ladder to reach the loft level without alerting the gunman to his presence. The confrontation was brief and decisive. The sniper, focused on his distant targets, never saw Marcus coming. Within seconds, Marcus had eliminated the threat and claimed the sniper's advanced night vision equipment, giving him a crucial advantage in the darkness. From his elevated position in the barn, Marcus could see the full scope of Breslin's assault. At least 12 attackers had positioned themselves in a coordinated pattern around the ranch, using suppressing fire to keep the federal agents pinned down while an assault team prepared to breach the main house. Marcus's radio crackled with Agent Rawlings' voice, transmitted from somewhere near the burning guest cabin. Marcus, we've got wounded agents who need immediate evacuation. Can you provide covering fire from your position? Negative, Marcus replied. I can see the assault team moving toward the main house. If they reach Elena's position, the game's over. Marcus, Agent Morrison is badly hurt. She needs medical attention now, or she's not going to make it. The choice that Marcus faced was exactly the kind of impossible decision that had haunted him since Afghanistan. Save the wounded agent who was depending on him, or protect Elena from the immediate threat approaching her position. Either choice could result in someone's death. For a moment, Marcus felt the familiar paralysis of guilt and self-doubt beginning to cloud his judgment. Then Elena's words from their conversation on the porch echoed in his mind. Sometimes good people make the best decisions they can with the information they have, and bad things still happen. Marcus made his choice with the clarity that comes from accepting responsibility without accepting blame for outcomes beyond his control. Agent Rawlings, I'm going to create a diversion that should draw the assault team away from the main house. Use that window to get Agent Morrison to safety. Without waiting for a response, Marcus began systematic fire from the barn loft, targeting the assault team's support positions with the precision of a trained marksman. His shots forced Breslin's men to take cover and reconsider their approach to the main house, buying crucial time for both the wounded agents and Elena's continued safety. Marcus's intervention also revealed his position to Breslin's team. Within minutes, the barn was taking concentrated fire from multiple directions, the old wooden structure offering minimal protection against military-grade ammunition. Marcus was preparing to abandon his position when he heard a sound that made Him smile grimly, the roar of diesel engines approaching at high speed. Tom Bradley and the neighboring ranchers had arrived in force, their pickup trucks loaded with armed men, who understood that their community was under attack. The arrival of local reinforcements changed the tactical situation dramatically. Breslin's team found themselves caught between federal agents, an entrenched sniper, and a mobile force of ranchers who knew every inch of the surrounding terrain. What had begun as a coordinated assault quickly devolved into a chaotic firefight. Marcus used the confusion to abandon the burning barn and work his way toward the guest cabin, where Agent Rawlings was attempting to provide medical aid to Agent Morrison. The senior agent had taken a bullet in the chest and was losing blood rapidly, her breathing shallow and labored. "How bad?" Marcus asked as he applied pressure to the wound, while Agent Rawlings prepared an emergency medical kit. "Bad." "Enough," Agent Rawlings replied grimly. "She needs a trauma surgeon, not field medicine." "But the medical helicopter can't land while we're taking fire." Marcus looked around at the ongoing battle, calculating odds and possibilities. The ranchers had gained the upper hand through superior numbers and local knowledge, but Breslin's team was still operational and dangerous. More importantly, Marcus hadn't seen any sign of Breslin himself, which suggested that the crime boss was either directing the assault from a safe distance or preparing a final gambit. The answer came in the form of an explosion that rocked the main house, followed by the distinctive sound of a helicopter approaching from the south. Marcus looked up to see a military-style aircraft flying without lights, approaching the ranch at low altitude. "That's not medical evacuation," Agent Rawlings observed with professional calm. Marcus grabbed his radio and tried to contact Elena in the basement, but got only static in response. Either the communication jamming was still active, or the explosion had damaged the basement systems. Without knowing Elena's status, Marcus couldn't determine whether she was still secure or if Breslin's assault team had breached her defenses. The helicopter settled into a landing pattern near the main house, disgorging additional armed men who moved with the disciplined coordination of military special forces. But among them, Marcus recognized a figure who clearly wasn't a soldier, an older man in expensive civilian clothes who moved with the arrogant confidence of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Antonio Breslin had come to finish his war against the witnesses personally. Marcus made a decision that would have been impossible for the guilt-ridden veteran who had hidden at the Broken Arrow Ranch for 15 years. He handed Agent Morrison's medical care over to Agent Rawlings and began moving toward the main house, determined to end the threat to Elena and his community once and for all. "Marcus, where are you going?" Agent Rawlings called after him. "To settle this," Marcus replied simply, moving through the chaos of the ongoing firefight. Marcus used every skill he had learned in 2 tours of combat to approach the main house undetected. Breslin's reinforcements had secured a perimeter around the building, but their focus was on external threats, not on a single man who knew every approach and hiding place on the property. Marcus reached the house just as Breslin's men began placing explosive charges on the blast door leading to the basement. Elena was trapped below, and the steel barrier that had protected her was about to become her tomb. From a concealed position near the kitchen window, Marcus could see Breslin standing in the living room, checking his watch with the impatience of a man accustomed to having his orders carried out immediately. The crime boss was older than Marcus had expected, perhaps 65, but he carried himself with the bearing of someone who had never doubted his own power. "How much longer?" Breslin demanded of his demolition expert. 2 minutes for the charges to be properly placed, then 30 seconds for detonation. The man replied in accented English that suggested Eastern European military training. Marcus had less than 3 minutes to save Elena's life and end the threat that had terrorized them for months. Moving with desperate precision, he began eliminating Breslin's security team one by one, using the chaos of the ongoing battle outside to mask the sounds of his approach. The first guard went down silently, taken from behind with techniques Marcus had learned in ranger training. The second guard was dispatched with a knife thrust that prevented any alarm from being raised. But as Marcus approached the third guard position, his luck ran out. A floorboard creaked under his weight, and the remaining guards spun around with weapon raised. Marcus was faster, but the exchange of gunfire alerted Breslin and his demolitions expert to the threat in their midst. "Colonel Petrov, forget the charges," Breslin ordered. "Kill whoever's in the house, then we'll leave. The helicopter is standing by." Marcus found himself facing a former Spetsnaz colonel who moved with the deadly efficiency of elite Russian special forces. The man was smaller than Marcus but faster, and the confined space of the ranch house favored close-quarters combat over Marcus's advantages in size and strength. The fight that followed was brutal and decisive. Colonel Petrov was skilled, but Marcus was fighting for something more important than money or criminal empire. He was fighting for the woman he loved, for the community that had accepted him, and for the chance to build a life free from the guilt that had consumed him for 15 years. When the colonel finally fell, Marcus was bleeding from multiple wounds, but still functional. Breslin stood in the doorway, holding a pistol trained on Marcus's chest, his expression a mixture of rage and grudging respect. "You have cost me everything," Breslin said quietly. "My organization, my freedom, my reputation. All for some schoolteacher who owed me pocket change." "She was never just pocket change," Marcus replied, keeping his hands visible while calculating the distance between them. "She was a human being who deserved better than what you offered." Breslin's laugh was bitter and ugly. "Human beings are commodities, cowboy. Resources to be exploited and discarded when they're no longer useful. You've just been too naive to understand how the world really works." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But I understand how my world works. And in my world, we protect the people we care about." The gunshot, when it came, wasn't from Breslin's weapon. Elena had managed to override the basement security systems and emerged behind the crime boss while he was focused on Marcus. Her shot took Breslin in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying across the room. Marcus covered the distance between them in 2 strides, tackling the wounded crime boss to the floor and ending the threat once and for all. Outside, the sounds of gunfire were dying down as the ranchers and surviving federal agents gained control of the situation. Agent Rawlings arrived with backup just as Marcus was securing Breslin with zip ties, the crime boss unconscious from blood loss and shock. Elena threw herself into Marcus's arms, both of them shaking with relief and adrenaline. "Is it over?" Elena asked, her voice muffled against Marcus's chest. Marcus looked around at the destroyed ranch house, then out the broken windows at the community of ranchers who had risked their lives to protect one of their own. Agent Morrison was being loaded into a medical helicopter that had finally been able to land, and Timothy was helping federal agents secure the remaining criminals. "Yeah," Marcus said softly, holding Elena close and feeling the last of his 15-year burden of guilt finally lift from his shoulders. "It's over." 3 months later, Marcus and Elena stood on the front porch of the rebuilt ranch house, watching the sun set over the Montana mountains. The Broken Arrow Ranch bore little resemblance to the Fortress of Solitude it had been just a year earlier. Elena's influence had transformed it into a warm, welcoming home filled with laughter and the sounds of community. Elena wore a simple white dress and a wildflower crown made by her students at Cedar Falls Elementary, where she had returned to teaching full-time. Marcus wore his grandfather's wedding suit, altered to accommodate his massive frame, but carrying the weight of family tradition. Tom Bradley had officiated the ceremony, his weathered face beaming with pride as he pronounced them husband and wife. The entire community had attended, transforming the ranch into a celebration of love, redemption, and the power of people to protect what they value most. As the last of the wedding guests departed, and the ranch settled into peaceful quiet, Elena leaned against Marcus's chest and watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Any regrets?" she asked softly. Marcus considered the question, thinking about the lonely years he had spent in isolation, the guilt that had nearly consumed him, and the violence that had brought them together. Then he looked down at the woman who had given him back his faith in love and community, and smiled. "Only that it took me so long to find you," he said simply. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon, but the sound no longer seemed lonely to Marcus. It was simply another voice in the symphony of the Montana wilderness, part of the world he had finally learned to embrace rather than hide from. The Broken Arrow Ranch had become what it was always meant to be, not a refuge from life, but a foundation for building one. 1 year after the wedding, Elena Thornfield stood in the kitchen of the rebuilt ranch house, watching through the window as her husband worked with a group of young men in the main corral. The Broken Arrow Ranch had evolved again, this time into something neither she nor Marcus had originally envisioned: a rehabilitation center for troubled veterans, struggling with PTSD and reintegration into civilian life. The transformation had begun 6 months earlier when Timothy Walsh approached Marcus with an unexpected proposal. Timothy had used his share of the reward money from Breslin's capture to complete his education, earning a degree in social work with a specialization in trauma counseling. But more importantly, he had recognized something in Marcus's story that resonated with his own experience of helplessness and recovery. "You saved more than just Elena and me that day," Timothy had explained during a visit to the ranch. "You showed us what it looks like when someone refuses to let their past define their future. There are a lot of veterans out there who need to see that example." Marcus had initially resisted the idea of opening their home to strangers, worried about Elena's safety and their hard-won privacy. But Elena had surprised him by embracing Timothy's proposal with enthusiasm that reminded Marcus why he had fallen in love with her nurturing spirit. "Marcus, you spent 15 years believing that your choices in Afghanistan made you dangerous to the people you cared about," Elena had argued. "What if those same experiences could help other veterans find their way back to life?" The first resident had been Derek Williams, a Marine who had served 3 tours in Iraq before returning home to find that civilian life felt alien and threatening. Derek had been sleeping in his car in the Walmart parking lot in Billings when Timothy found him, malnourished and suffering from severe anxiety attacks that made steady employment impossible. Marcus had seen something familiar in Derek's hollow eyes, the look of a man who had witnessed too much violence and lost faith in his ability to exist peacefully among normal people. But he had also seen the fundamental decency that military service hadn't been able to destroy, the core of honor that just needed the right environment to heal and grow. Within weeks of Derek's arrival, the change in both men had been remarkable. Derek found purpose in the daily routines of ranch work, his military discipline channeling into caring for livestock and maintaining equipment. Marcus discovered that helping another veteran navigate the path back to normalcy was itself a form of therapy, proof that his own recovery was real and sustainable. Word spread through veterans networks and VA hospitals about the unconventional program taking shape at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Applications began arriving from across the region. Former soldiers seeking an alternative to traditional treatment programs that had failed to address their specific needs. Elena watched now as Marcus demonstrated proper horse handling techniques to 3 new residents who had arrived the previous week. Carlos Mendoza had been a helicopter pilot in Afghanistan, struggling with survivor's guilt after a crash that killed his co-pilot. James Patterson was a former Army medic whose inability to save wounded comrades had left him unable to trust his own judgment in crisis situations. Sarah Chun, the program's first female resident, was a Navy Intelligence specialist whose exposure to classified horrors had left her unable to sleep peacefully or form meaningful relationships. Each of them carried wounds that traditional therapy had been unable to fully heal, but Marcus's approach was proving remarkably effective. He didn't try to counsel them through their trauma. Instead, he showed them through daily example that it was possible to carry painful memories without being destroyed by them. The key, Marcus had explained to Elena one evening, isn't forgetting what happened or pretending it doesn't matter. It's learning to use those experiences as a source of strength rather than shame. The ranch program operated on principles of mutual respect, shared responsibility, and gradual reintegration into community life. Residents worked alongside Marcus and Elena in all aspects of ranch operation, from cattle management to equipment maintenance. They attended community events in Cedar Falls, volunteered at Elena's school, and gradually rebuilt their confidence in social interactions. But the program's success had also brought unexpected challenges. The most significant emerged on a cold February morning when Elena discovered an unmarked sedan parked on the county road that bordered their property. The vehicle's occupants weren't making any attempt at concealment, but their presence triggered security protocols that Marcus had hoped never to use again. Federal marshals, Marcus reported after using binoculars to study the sedan's occupants. Either they're providing protection we didn't request, or there's a problem we don't know about. Elena felt a familiar chill of apprehension. You think this is related to Breslin? Breslin's been in federal supermax for a year, but his organization had tentacles we might not have uncovered. It's possible that someone connected to his network has decided to settle old scores. Marcus called Agent Jennifer Rawlings, who had been promoted following her role in Breslin's capture and now supervised organized crime investigations for the entire region. Her response to Marcus's call was immediate and concerning. Marcus, we've been monitoring increased chatter from what's left of Breslin's network. Nothing specific, but enough to warrant protective surveillance. There's also something else you need to know. Breslin died in prison last week. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. How? Officially, natural causes. Heart attack in his cell. But Breslin was in perfect health, and the timing is suspicious. We think someone in his organization decided he had become a liability and arranged his elimination. The implications were troubling. If Breslin had been murdered to prevent him from providing additional information to federal investigators, it suggested that his criminal network was still active and potentially dangerous. More concerning was the possibility that Breslin's death had been orchestrated to send a message to the witnesses who had testified against him. Agent Rawlings, what's the threat assessment? Marcus asked, automatically shifting into the tactical mindset that Elena had hoped they could leave behind. Unknown but credible. We're maintaining surveillance on your property and monitoring communications, but we haven't identified any specific plans or timeline. It could be nothing, or it could be a revenge operation that's been in planning for months. Elena looked out the window at the veterans working peacefully in the corral, unaware that their sanctuary might once again become a battleground. Derek was teaching Carlos how to work with a particularly stubborn horse, while James and Sarah repaired fence posts damaged by the winter weather. The thought of exposing these healing men and women to violence made Elena sick with worry. Marcus, we have to protect them, Elena said after he hung up from his conversation with Agent Rawlings. These people came here to escape violence, not walk into the middle of another criminal war. I know, Marcus replied grimly, which means we need to decide whether to evacuate everyone until the threat passes, or stay and prepare for whatever comes. The decision was complicated by factors that hadn't existed during their previous confrontation with Breslin's organization. The ranch now housed vulnerable people who weren't equipped for combat. Elena was 3 months pregnant with their first child, and the program they had built represented something larger than their personal safety. Marcus called a meeting of all the residents, explaining the situation with the same straightforward honesty he brought to all aspects of the ranch program. The response surprised and moved both him and Elena. "Mr. Thornfield," Derek said, speaking for the group, "you gave us a place to heal when nobody else would take a chance on us. If there's trouble coming, we're not running away and leaving you to face it alone." Carlos nodded agreement. "Besides, we're all trained soldiers. We know how to handle ourselves in a fight." "This isn't about military capability," Marcus replied. "It's about protecting what we've built here. The ranch program is bigger than any of us individually." "Exactly," Sarah added. "Which is why we need to protect it together." Over the next 3 days, the Broken Arrow Ranch transformed once again, this time into a carefully prepared defensive position that balanced security needs with the appearance of normal operations. The veterans brought skills that complemented Marcus's military experience. Carlos's aviation background allowed him to establish aerial surveillance protocols. James's medical training ensured they could handle casualties, and Sarah's intelligence expertise helped them analyze potential threats. Elena divided her time between teaching her regular classes in Cedar Falls and coordinating with federal agents who were trying to identify the source of the potential threat. The stress of constant vigilance was affecting her pregnancy, but she refused Marcus's suggestions that she relocate to a secure federal facility until the situation was resolved. "We've been through this before," Elena reminded him. "I'm not running away from our life every time someone decides to threaten us." The attack, when it finally came, arrived in a form that none of them had anticipated. Rather than the direct assault they had prepared for, the threat materialized as a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to destroy the ranch program through legal and financial pressure. It began with surprise inspections from multiple government agencies, each citing anonymous complaints about safety violations, environmental concerns, or improper licensing for the veterans program. Then came lawsuits alleging that the ranch was operating an unlicensed medical facility and exposing vulnerable veterans to dangerous conditions. Elena was driving home from school when she received the call that changed everything. Marcus's voice was tight with controlled anger as he explained the latest development. "Elena, someone has filed a complaint with Child Protective Services alleging that our home environment is unsuitable for raising children. They're sending investigators tomorrow to evaluate whether you're fit to be a mother." Elena pulled her truck to the side of the road, overwhelmed by the viciousness of the attack. "Marcus, they're trying to destroy everything we've built. Our marriage, the veterans program, our future family. They want to take it all away." "Which means we're winning," Marcus replied with grim satisfaction. "If they thought they could eliminate us with violence, they would have tried that first. Legal warfare means they're desperate and running out of options." But Elena wasn't comforted by Marcus's tactical analysis. The bureaucratic assault was proving more emotionally draining than physical threats had been. Each investigation, each lawsuit, each questioning of their motives and capabilities felt like a personal violation of everything they had sacrificed to build. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Agent Rawlings called Marcus on a Tuesday evening with information that explained the coordinated nature of the attacks they were facing. "We've identified the source," Agent Rawlings announced. "Breslin's nephew, Vincent Breslin Jr., has been operating out of Denver using inherited assets to fund a revenge campaign against everyone involved in his uncle's downfall. He's hired lawyers, private investigators, and corrupt officials to destroy you through legal means rather than direct violence." "Why the change in tactics?" Marcus asked. "Because Vincent Jr. is smarter than his uncle. He knows that making you into martyrs would only strengthen the veterans program and draw federal attention to his activities. But if he can destroy your reputation and financial stability, the program dies quietly and he gets his revenge without legal consequences." Elena felt a surge of anger at the calculated cruelty of the campaign against them. "What can we do to stop him?" We're building a federal case against Vincent Jr. for witness intimidation and corruption, but that takes time. In the meantime, you need to document everything and avoid giving him any legitimate grounds for his complaints. The solution came from the veterans themselves, who had recognized the attack on their sanctuary as a threat to their own recovery and future. Derek had been documenting every interaction with government inspectors, creating a paper trail that revealed the coordinated nature of the harassment. Carlos had used his technical skills to trace the funding sources behind the lawsuits, uncovering financial connections that federal investigators could follow. Most importantly, James had reached out to other veterans who had benefited from similar programs across the country, building a network of support that could challenge the legal assault through public pressure and political influence. Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield, Sarah said during a group meeting 3 weeks after the campaign against them had begun, "We've been thinking about this all wrong. Vincent Jr. is attacking us because he thinks we're isolated and vulnerable, but we're not alone anymore." She gestured toward a laptop screen showing a video conference with veterans, family members, and program administrators from across the United States. "This is what we've built, not just a ranch program, but a movement. And movements are a lot harder to destroy than individual targets." The video conference marked the beginning of a coordinated response that Vincent Jr. hadn't anticipated. Veterans organizations began investigating the sources of complaints against the Broken Arrow Ranch, uncovering evidence of corruption and intimidation. Legal aid societies offered pro bono representation to fight the frivolous lawsuits. Most importantly, media outlets picked up the story of a successful veterans program being targeted by the nephew of a dead crime boss. Within a month, Vincent Breslin Jr. found himself facing federal charges for witness intimidation, corruption of government officials, and criminal conspiracy. The legal assault on the ranch collapsed as quickly as it had begun, but the experience had taught Marcus and Elena valuable lessons about protecting what they had built. On a warm spring evening, Elena sat on the porch swing Marcus had installed. For her, watching their residents work with a new group of arriving veterans. Her pregnancy was now showing, and Marcus had become almost comically protective, insisting on carrying anything heavier than a coffee cup and checking on her constantly. Throughout the day, "You know," Elena said as Marcus settled beside her on the swing, "I used to think that our story ended when we defeated Breslin and got married, but now I realize it was just the beginning." Marcus followed her gaze toward the corral, where Derek was teaching new arrivals the same horse handling techniques Marcus had shown him a year earlier. "The beginning of what?" "Something bigger than just our personal happiness," Elena replied, placing Marcus's large hand on her growing belly. "We're building something that will outlast us, something that helps other people find their way back to life." As if responding to his father's touch, the baby kicked strongly enough for Marcus to feel the movement through Elena's skin. Marcus smiled with wonder, still amazed by the reality of their growing family. "Have you thought about names?" Elena asked, enjoying Marcus's expression of paternal awe. "For a boy, maybe Samuel, after my grandfather who built this ranch. For a girl." Marcus paused, his voice growing softer. "Maybe Grace for what you brought into my life." Elena leaned against Marcus's chest, listening to the sounds of their extended family, the veterans who had found healing at the ranch, the horses moving peacefully in the pasture, the distant sounds of the community that had embraced them. The Broken Arrow Ranch had become what Marcus's grandfather had always intended it to be, not just a place to raise cattle, but a place to raise hope. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon, and this time Marcus heard in the sound not loneliness, but a call to all the lost creatures to find their way home. 5 years later, the Broken Arrow Ranch looked nothing like the isolated fortress Marcus Thornfield had once called home. What had begun as a simple cattle operation had evolved into something unprecedented, a thriving community that blended working ranch, veterans rehabilitation center, and family homestead into a model that was being replicated across the country. Alina stood on the hill overlooking the main compound, watching their 4-year-old daughter Grace chase chickens around the farmyard while their 2-year-old son Samuel toddled after her on unsteady legs. The children had grown up surrounded by the veterans who had found healing at the ranch, creating an extended family that defied traditional definitions. The success of their program had attracted national attention. Documentary filmmakers, government officials, and mental health professionals made regular pilgrimages to study their methods. But Alina knew that the real measure of their achievement wasn't in the awards or recognition. It was in the faces of the men and women who had arrived broken and left whole. Derek Williams now ran similar programs in 3 other states, using techniques he had learned during his recovery at the Broken Arrow. Carlos Mendoza had returned to aviation, flying medical helicopters and crediting the ranch with saving his life. Sarah Chun worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs, advocating for alternative treatment approaches based on her experience. "Mama," Grace called out, her voice carrying clearly across the farmyard. "Uncle Timothy says it's time for the ceremony." Alina smiled at her daughter's excitement. Today marked the graduation of the ranch's largest group of veterans, 12 men and women who had completed the 2-year program and were ready to return to independent civilian life. The ceremony had become a tradition, celebrating not just individual achievement, but the community bonds that made healing possible. Marcus emerged from the main barn, his massive frame now showing touches of gray at the temples, but his presence still commanding respect from both veterans and livestock. He carried Samuel easily on his shoulders, the little boy giggling with delight at his elevated view of the world. "The graduates are ready," Marcus announced, settling Samuel into Alina's arms. "They wanted you to see something before the ceremony starts." Alina followed Marcus to the memorial garden they had created behind the main house. 12 new stones had been added to the pathway, each one engraved with a message from the graduating veterans to the community that had helped them heal. But it was the centerpiece that took Alina's breath away, a sculpture crafted from ranch materials that depicted a phoenix rising from flames, surrounded by the figures of people supporting its ascent. "We commissioned it from an artist in Billings," explained Jessica Morrison, the newest graduate and a former Army engineer who had struggled with traumatic brain injury. "It represents what this place gave us, not just healing, but the strength to lift each other up." Alina felt tears prick her eyes as she read the inscription at the sculpture's base, dedicated to Marcus and Elena Thornfield, who proved that broken things can be made beautiful again, and that no one has to heal alone. Timothy Walsh, now the ranch's official program director, stepped forward with his characteristic gentle smile. "Alina, Marcus, this sculpture represents something bigger than individual gratitude. It represents the transformation of an idea into a movement." He gestured toward the assembled crowd, not just the graduating veterans, but their families, community members from Cedar Falls, and representatives from similar programs that had been established across the nation. "When you started this program, you thought you were helping a few struggling veterans, but you actually created a new model for community-based healing that's changing lives everywhere." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Alina could have imagined when she first arrived at the ranch as a frightened woman running from lone sharks. The graduates spoke about their journeys from despair to hope, crediting not just the Thornfields but each other for their recovery. Family members shared stories of watching loved ones return to life. Community leaders discussed the positive impact the ranch had brought to the entire region, but it was Marcus's speech that surprised Alina most. Her husband had never been comfortable with public speaking, preferring action to words. But as he stood before the gathered crowd, his voice carried a confidence and peace that reflected the profound changes in his own life. "When I first came to this ranch 15 years ago, I thought I was running away from the world," Marcus began. I believed that my experiences in combat had made me too dangerous to be around other people. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. He paused, looking out at Elena and their children, then at the veterans who had become family. I learned that healing isn't something you do alone in isolation. It's something that happens when broken people decide to trust each other enough to become whole together. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. Every person who has found healing here has also contributed to someone else's recovery. That's the real secret of what we've built, not a program or a facility, but a community where everyone's strength compensates for everyone else's weakness. Elena watched the faces in the crowd, seeing understanding and recognition in the eyes of people who had experienced their own versions of loss and recovery. This was what they had truly created, not just a ranch or a program, but proof that human beings could overcome almost anything when they refused to face it alone. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse for the evening celebration, Elena found herself alone with Marcus on the porch, where they had first confessed their love for each other years earlier. The view hadn't changed. The same mountains rose against the same sky, but everything else was transformed. "Do you ever miss it?" Elena asked, settling into the porch swing with Samuel sleeping in her arms. The quiet, the solitude, the simplicity of just raising cattle? Marcus considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the peace of not being responsible for anyone but myself. But I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. This chaos, this constant activity, these people depending on us, it's the best kind of complicated life." Grace climbed into Marcus's lap, her energy finally depleted by the day's excitement. "Daddy, are you really a giant like everyone says?" Marcus smiled, brushing his daughter's hair from her face. "I'm just big enough to protect the people I love, little one. That's all any of us need to be." Elena looked out at the ranch that had become so much more than either of them had dreamed possible. Veterans were gathered around a campfire, sharing stories and planning their futures. Families were loading cars for the drive back to their own communities, carrying with them the hope that healing was possible. The lights of Cedar Falls twinkled in the distance, a reminder of the broader community that had embraced their mission. "Marcus," Elena said softly, "I've been thinking about something Timothy said during the ceremony. About how we created a movement without realizing it. What about it? I wonder if that's how all the best things happen. Not through grand planning or ambitious schemes, but through ordinary people deciding to do something good for the person right in front of them." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the real lesson of this place. You don't have to save the world. You just have to save the small piece of it that you can reach." As if to prove his point, Grace had fallen asleep in his arms, her small hand clutching his finger with complete trust. Samuel breathed peacefully against Elena's chest, secure in the knowledge that he was surrounded by people who would protect and nurture him. The Broken Arrow Ranch had become what Elena now understood it was always meant to be, not a refuge from the world's problems, but a demonstration that those problems could be solved through the simple revolutionary act of caring for each other. In the distance, a coyote called across the Montana landscape, but the sound no longer spoke of loneliness. It spoke of wild things finding their place in a vast world, of creatures calling to their pack, of the eternal truth that no living thing was meant to face the darkness alone. The giant rancher and his cook had discovered that the greatest bruises, the ones that marked the soul rather than the body, could indeed be healed. And in healing themselves, they had created something that would outlast them both, proof that broken people could become whole, that isolated individuals could become a community, and that love really could triumph over every kind of darkness. Story that had begun with a lonely man noticing bruises on a frightened woman had become something larger than either of them could have imagined. It had become a testament to the power of human beings to save each other, one act of courage at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.